Welcome to Spy News, our weekly call-in show here on WSPY. Ryan Morton, news director, and myself, Barb Nadeau, every Thursday morning at 9:05. Ryan, this is the chance for our listeners to give us their opinions on the news of the week. And every week it's a different show. We just never know where we're going to go with this show until the week starts to unfold. And sometimes it's good news, sometimes it's bad news, sometimes it's education, sometimes it's health, sometimes it's politics and misbehavior.
Whatever we can to try and make each week a little bit different from the week before, so that people with their different interests and different concerns can be reached each week of the year. So, and
it's so interesting to hear the variety of topics that our listeners bring to us, and so we want to open the phone lines to you and tell you that later on in this half hour we'll be taking your calls. If you want to weigh in on this conversation or just make a comment about life in our area, the numbers are 630-552 and 553-7018, or in the 815 area code, you can call us at 786-7018. So basically, whatever exchange you're calling from, the last four numbers are 7018, and that's our contest lines, and that's where we take calls. But in our first half of the show today, we want to have an interview, and we're going to be talking with Stephanie Weber. Stephanie is the Executive Director of Suicide Prevention Services of America. Stephanie has been a leader in prevention and a prevention expert, and reaching out to families for so many years in situations of attempted suicide, in the aftermath of suicide. And this is a very serious topic, Ryan. And it kind of came, just came to our hearts this week as we saw earlier this week the story that we had in the news of a 14-year-old boy who was missing from our area, the family searching for him, and then later on found and the victim of an apparent suicide. And this half hour is not about that boy. And we want to say that. This is not to cause pain or suffering to anyone out there, but to say, wait a minute, this is happening more than we realize. And a lot of times we don't even report on suicides. This is a unique situation.
The only reason we reported on this story was because he had gone missing, and so people were concerned about his whereabouts. But oftentimes, you're right, there are suicides that we don't want to put on the air. We don't want to
cause any more pain,
any more grief for the family. Exactly.
Right, and it's a private family situation that it does not come to light, and our law enforcement officials are very sensitive and careful not to even let us know that it was a suicide. Sometimes we just see it on a dispatch note, and we think, well, that must have been. But it's not told to us. The only way we found out is that because that boy was missing, the sheriff's office decided that they would let us know what happened.
And maybe that's a problem. That's something we can ask Stephanie in terms of awareness and building awareness for what a problem suicide is. Maybe there should be more talking about it. Maybe there should be more coverage.
And we do need to ask her that question, because I think that one of the things that we want to point out here is that it's so alarming to have a 14-year-old, why would someone so young decide to end their life? And it seems to be a growing trend. And so I'm very happy to say that we do have Stephanie Weber on the line now. Stephanie, thank you for joining us on our show.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here.
Stephanie, let me just start with this question right now. This family, of course, are an area family, and so many family members and friends are really suffering. Where can they get help right now in the situation that they're in?
They can contact Suicide Prevention Services of America. And in fact, I was aware of this story really from the beginning, because my coordinator of services received a call, and this was a friend of hers. So she knew the family, and immediately she reached out to that family and gave them our information. We offered to do an outreach visit, which we will do this week, where I send someone who has also lost a child to suicide, and then another survivor goes along. And right there, you're destigmatizing. You're saying, this has happened to me. I understand what you're going through. So they can actually call our offices. We will assist with anything from helping sit with them through funeral arrangements to having brochures at the funeral to just being there and holding their hands.
Stephanie, you mentioned, and you just said having information available like brochures at the visitation and the funeral. That's so helpful. But one of the things you said was a friend of a friend knows the family, and it almost seems as if, years ago we used to say, well, there was an awareness campaign about alcohol, and they said everyone knows an alcoholic, and that was hard for people to realize that they did. But it's getting to the point where everyone knows someone or some family that has had this kind of event happen.
Absolutely. There is not one person that is listening right now that doesn't know of a situation where there has been a suicide. Not one.
So what are the warning signs? How would you even recognize it? Because this is like the unseen issue. So how would you recognize a warning sign of someone who was potentially suicidal?
Well, with our younger people, for one thing, we know that there is bullying going on in the schools. I'm just going to set that factor right out there. But depression, which is a part of mental illness, those are the key warning signs as far as not eating, not sleeping, withdrawing, giving personal effects away. We find so often that for our young people, they've been crying out for help, and it's just not recognized. And that's where, and you know this, Barb, because I've been on your show so many times, that's where we want to go out and do the preventative work before this happens. I got a call last week from a parent. Her daughter was in Linden Oaks, and she's 13 years old, and she's been cutting, and there's all kinds of signs, And she had already been through this with another daughter. And, you want to say, okay, this is out there. These kids are hurting, and they're crying out for help. We do have many contracts in the schools where we just go out and educate, but the hardest people to get in are the parents because they don't think it's going to happen to them, or they think it's a reflection on their parenting, which it is not.
Stephanie, I think that there are a lot of people who would be surprised to know how prevalent this is. Beyond just knowing someone, Barb and I were talking about this yesterday. Every single week, we cover 4 counties, but they're not huge towns, with the exception of Aurora. But every single week in either Plano or Yorkville or Sandwich or DeKalb or one of these towns, there's either a suicide or a suicide attempt that's listed on the police log. It happens, I think, a lot more frequently than people might even realize.
It absolutely does, yes.
So,
and, one of the things you said, Mike, in your intro that I do want to bring up.
This is Ryan, but that's good.
Ryan, I'm sorry.
But thanks, Mike, to our call. Mike took your call, and it's so good to have Mike there. But this is Ryan, and that's good.
Hi, Ryan.
Call me whatever you want, Stephanie.
We're just glad to have you, Stephanie.
No matter what I call you.
That's right.
It is important that people not keep the fact that their loved one died by suicide a secret, because that continues the stigma. Years ago, we wouldn't talk about cancer. We whispered it. We called it the big C. I think the best obituaries that I can cite are the ones that said, took his own life as a result of depression.
There was
there you have it.
There was a perfect example was a girl this past week in DeKalb who apparently jumped off a building. Mm-hmm. And her obituary just said that she had passed away. And so you would encourage families then to not hide behind that veil.
Absolutely, because if you can't say how someone died, you can't even begin step 1 of the grief process.
This is interesting because will a newspaper print those words? Is there, because it seems to me there was always a guideline that you wouldn't say that.
If the family asks for it to be in the obituary, then they will.
They'll abide by the family's wishes.
And that is something that could be actually a healing thing to actually put it out there, because you had mentioned that this one family that you knew had 2 daughters that were both dealing with similar things. And it seems like if you've had it in one layer of the family, maybe one generation, or even in an older sibling, it would it would be like the other people in the family would think, well, what about me? What's wrong with me? And then they'll start that self-doubt, and then it will escalate.
Right. And, people will say, well, we kept it a secret for years, and then we finally started telling people, and then people will say, oh, I had a similar situation. My brother, my father, my mother. So let's talk about it and find people who get it and understand and not make this such a terrible stigma.
We're talking to Stephanie Weber, the Executive Director of Suicide Prevention Services of America, based in Batavia. You're so active over the years here in this area, Stephanie. Tell us, though, looking at 2013, looking at the past few years, are there trends in terms of ages of people who kill themselves? Are we seeing an increase in younger people, for instance? This boy who died this week, 14 years old. Are we seeing more in the youth? Are we seeing more in adults? What are the trends?
We are seeing more in youth. It's dropping down to 11 and 12 years old. We're also seeing more cutters. It used to be girls were the ones that did the cutting. Boys are also into cutting.
And is cutting usually a cry for help, or are they actually trying to take their lives with the cutting?
It can be either. A cutting is a way to release and some of that emotional pressure, lets them know they're alive. But also it can be a sign, it's a serious sign of depression, but it can also lead towards suicide. But yes, we're seeing more down in the 11 and 12-year-old. 14 is tragically young, but not unusual.
This is so hard to hear, and
I know
it's so hard to think about. That this is like kind of like a grayscale, and that some of these behaviors that you are seeing, that a family may be seeing now, could be escalating in the future to more and more drastic measures, and they're not being noticed, or they're being ignored. So if you have a kid that's wearing, is it like long sleeves to cover? And are there other signs that a person could, you mentioned not eating and giving away stuff, anything else that you could look at and say, well, this is, and we want to turn this over in a minute to what we do about this when we see these signs, but any other signs that you can think of?
Well, sure. If they've been doing pretty well in school and suddenly they drop and have poor performance, we look at that. Are they getting into trouble at school? Are they skipping school? And again, I can't say enough about isolation, social media. You, as parents, we need to keep an eye on the cell phones and the social media. These kids, we're finding after these suicides that they've been communicating this ahead of time on social media. They can go on social media and find all kinds of ways to kill themselves. So it's important that we keep an eye on our kids. And as one parent said, I'm always the bad guy. Well, that's kind of the parent, isn't it? That's why they're kids and we're parents. But it's a community. It's a village. What do the teachers notice? What do the friends notice? It's a community that raises a child.
Well, let me ask you this, because I'm putting myself in the place of a lot of people probably, where they might have a small inkling of something, but they don't really want to go out on a ledge and ask someone about this or talk to them.
Yeah.
You see someone on Facebook, for instance. I have someone on Facebook now who I know semi-well. He's not a close personal friend, but the things that he's putting up there are a little bit concerning, because he seems so depressed and almost not wanting to go on. He hasn't made any explicit threats. What would you advise someone like that? Would you tell them to reach out to them, to reach out to someone they know?
Upon the first suspicion, don't wait for any further clues, because that person could be dead by then. I always say to people, I'd rather you felt foolish and made a mistake in the right direction than you waited for a second clue and had that person die.
And if at some point down the road, at least they can think back to people caring about them then.
Right, and ask the question, are you thinking of taking your life? That does not put the idea in their head.
It really doesn't. It really doesn't? Okay, because I think that's what parents are afraid, that they're going to put an idea in their kid's head.
No, remember sex education in the 60s? Don't teach the kids about sex education, because then they'll know about it. Well, the kids talk about suicide.
If they're in a bad place already, they've already thought about it.
Absolutely. It is not going to come from someone asking them.
The other thing that I think is kind of worth noting, I guess, for parents is that sometimes, there's differences, boys and girls and men and women, in the way that they might try to go forward with that idea. They're probably, somebody might just take some pills and get really sick because they don't know what they're doing, but someone else might do something more lethal.
Well, yeah. If you're going to stand in front of a train, there's not a second chance. I want you to be aware, too, that I run a group for attempt survivors up in Batavia twice a month. And one of our men, we just had a meeting last night. I mean, he took pills, and he should have died a year ago. And through some fluke, coincidence, act of God, his wife found him and got him to the hospital. But he took enough that should have been lethal. So jumping from a high-story building, you don't have a second chance.
So let's turn this into a more positive conversation, because this is very hard to take on a morning show. Let's talk about this idea of prevention. No, what you're doing, I think, is such, every day of your life, Stephanie, is such a valuable service to us, and we're glad to be able to shed some light on all the good work of suicide prevention services. But let's talk about that prevention point. What can our communities do? What can our schools do? And you mentioned our parents. What can we do, and how can we get people to better understand prevention? And I guess that's my question.
Invite us in to do training. Does it cost? Yes. But it is not a prohibitive cost. If you're a church, invite us in to talk to your congregation. If you're a social service agency, we will partner with you and we will come in and talk. Let's get the schools on board. We're working with Yorkville High School right now. But try to also, and this is the hard part, get the parents involved, whether it's a brown bag lunch, whether it's a night meeting. It's just educating everybody, and that can be done in an hour with parents. That can be done in health classes. That can be done in a half a day with teachers. Call us. Get us on the agenda. We're coming. We're here. We're anxious.
Give us your number again, Stephanie, so anyone who's been listening to this and wants to either, I guess there are probably two different numbers, the number to reach Suicide Prevention Services to get you to come to their community, but also anyone who might need some help, they can also call a hotline, right?
Yes. To reach us, to have us come in and do some training is 630-482-9699.
630-482-9699, and that's if you want someone to come in and do a presentation for your youth group, for your adult group, for your women's group, for the men's group at church, for the Rotary, the Kiwanis, everybody, the Lions, get everybody on board here.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you also have a hotline. Yeah.
Yes, and we're part of a national hotline. So if you call the hotline and it rings 3 times, and it doesn't ever ring busy, the fourth ring may roll over to a different center. But we're all trained to talk to people who have problems. And that is 1-800-273-TALK. And I can't remember the TALK, but you can look that up and tell people.
Well, this is easier to remember.
1-800-273-TALK.
1-800-273-TALK, the National Suicide Hotline. Okay. Yes. And then you also have a group. I understand that you've got a satellite office that opened in Yorkville if people needed to stop in to see you, but you also have a Survivors of Suicide group in Sandwich. And maybe you can explain to us a little bit about that Survivors of Suicide group, how they meet, what they do, and what is a survivor of suicide?
That's a good question. A survivor of suicide is anyone who has lost a family member or a friend to suicide. So if you think of it as survivors of suicide lost. The Aurora group has been running since 1982, and that meets the third Monday of every month at the Advent Christian Church. The Sandwich group is now about a year old. That meets the first Monday of every month from 7 to 9 at the Salem Lutheran Church, which is right near the hospital.
Okay, and what time do they meet?
from 7 to 9.
7 to 9 p.m., okay, at Salem Lutheran, the first Monday of the month.
And people can access all of this on our website, which is www.spsamerica.org. It'll give you directions to the churches. It'll give you the times. And then I also do a monthly newsletter, so people could get an e-version of that, or we could send out a hard copy as well.
Well, you know, I think the most important bit of information, first of all, is giving us these numbers and these contacts and letting us know where we can get help, but also giving us the permission to help other people and to actually, you know, tell them that we care and that we love them and that we want them here with us. And that is such a wonderful service. Just having a chance to talk to you today, Stephanie, has just been a real joy, because we know that we can maybe make a difference in one life and maybe many, many lives today that we have, you know, reached out to. So we're hoping that our listeners are, you know, writing down these numbers again and holding on to them and sharing this information with people who are not able to hear this radio show this morning.
And you know what, Barb? You and I go way back. You have always had a keen interest in helping people, and you have had me on your show many times, and I thank you for that, because you're doing a community service as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Stephanie Weber, the Executive Director of Suicide Prevention Services of America. Thank you for being with us, Stephanie. Ryan, this is just, you know, like I said, it's sad. It's heart-wrenching. You and I talked so much about this whole situation this week, and then realizing that this goes beyond one instance to many, many, many instances in our area. Our nice little quiet rural communities being touched by suicide, and we do want to give those numbers again.
And we will at the end of the show. Let's take a break, though, that we need to take before the end of the show.
We promised our listeners, and if they want to call in, they can, of course, call in and talk about this.